Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 9.11. And of course, we're playing as Japan. So let's continue this. This is, even though they're sort of shown out of order, this is the first Hearts of Iron video that I've made since losing my mind and that other one. Oh, yeah, autosave, good. So yeah, I'm a much more happy and stable person now, I'm sure. Okay, submarine engine has advanced. Very good. Let's take a look at that. Sort of kind of know we would be stopping that. And we can shift this over, and I did things slightly different when I replayed after the crash that ended the last episode shown. Yeah, we'll do periscope since that takes longer to get that started. Okay, new monumental building for a nation. Since we have advanced further in political research, we're now able to build one monumental building. Okay, let's see the plans, which should give me, okay, a bunch of those things, right. Now, let's look down and see their effects, because hey, major movie studio, and they did make movies in Japan, most assuredly. You know, they didn't, I don't think, I'm not saying there wasn't somebody with a camera making some movies in Siam, but there wasn't a major movie studio in Siam. There was a little bit of Chinese cinema, I remember. Watching something in an Anime Wong biography. She was a Chinese actress. Mostly did work in the US, but yeah. So, and places like Australia and New Zealand, I don't think there was a major Australian I mean, not even talking major like as in Hollywood like this represents, but even a real serious movie studio in Australia or New Zealand. Again, there probably been a few people, with cameras that could, and I'm sure there were some. I'm sitting here thinking about it. I'm sure there were some, newsreel stuff and whatever else, but I don't know. I've watched a lot of English language old movies from the 30s. Not everything, but a lot of it, and a lot of stuff that's, I say English language, a lot of stuff made in England. I would love to see some, I presume I would, maybe the movies suck or something if they exist, but I don't know of any specific Australian homegrown production stuff. May exist, but I don't know of it, but there was definitely Japan. And part of the reason why Australia, New Zealand, Canada doesn't really have much that existed just because it can get American and English films, and they're not that big of a market. There's not, especially back before World War II, there's not, I mean, it's a big place, but, comparatively population-wise, Australia wasn't that big population-wise. Okay, so we're talking about one of these ministries, starting from below the collective farms, down to small entertainment. So we have to go, these will cost us, but we are generating plenty of cash and things, supplies. So we would like something that reduces consumer goods, so we'll have to wait for entertainment shows. So maybe nothing to reduce entertainment shows. Advanced education system, that would be useful. Imperial War Ministry, well, we're not at war yet, and even though we're going to probably maybe late next year in this war go to war with China, I don't know that this is going to be critical issues for our war with China. Money we're doing fine with. Ruling party support, that could be useful. Again, money isn't what we're looking for. Ruling party support, costs us money. Again, we could afford that and get a lot more ruling party support. Research efficiency, imperial seat of government, ruling party support. I think that's the one we should go with because it will give us some of that leadership. No specific research improvement, but obviously more leadership means the ability to research more stuff or more officers, which we could also use. I've recently shifted a bit more to there because we had gone down to 101. Now we're back up to 102. Territorial pride, that's useful for Japan. National unity, we could use some more national unity. And ruling party support, as we can see here, we're pretty fractured, so get our ruling party support up. So I think that's what we're going to do. As you could tell, I was very close on going with Imperial University. I don't like that they sort of changed the names between it's not that I'm so OCD'd, but just if it says advanced education, I want advanced education, just so I know that I'm picking the right thing. Imperial seat of government, that's what it will be. Making sure I'm getting right over the right one. Yes, and we have the chance to back out of it if we did click the wrong one. Okay, as you can see, money, metal, supplies, gain and descent. I don't think that gain and descent is just sort of meant for us to shift more production to consumer goods as opposed to any real idea of descent, because we have an imperial seat of government now, or universities. I sort of kind of get the university thing. At least people's perceptions of what universities would cause dissent. Okay, so we now have this. It will help us out. After we've gone through our little negative impact of having it, we will only get benefits from having it. Broadcasting. Right. Yes. I already basically know what one I want to pick, but we might as well quickly walk through them for your benefit. Now, with Third Reich events, which I'm not playing with in this series, Germany gets level 1 of the 3 basic ones. Britain gets level 1 of 2 of them, representing the BBC and the massive radio programs that were really already in place by 36. A lot of the sort of state-organized, centralized radio programs basically didn't. There was lots of radio broadcasters, like there's lots of radio broadcasters in America at this time. Actually, I think, well, maybe there was already the bust. There was at one point a big radio bubble or whatever bust, there were like 5 or 6 radio stations per counties in these, rural counties that were everywhere popping up, and everybody was investing in them, and eventually I think a good 3/4 of them go out of business. Because, and there were also, only maybe county-wide broadcasting. Sort of like you would think of as, hometown newspaper. Well, eventually, or as more and more powerful, centralized broadcast antenna situation, broadcast towers were up there that would reach more and more people. Everybody was tuning into what was most popular, because that was most popular. So all these little things, most all of them disappeared, and so that's a bit of a bubble that busts in America. But none of that until really you're leading into, well, there is a little bit of the NRA, I guess it is, not the National Rifle Association, the oh, I forget what it stands for. It's not radio. It's something under the Wilson's program that are, you see it on some of the old films, an NRA approved film or something like that, and I forget. But there is some of that going on, but nothing like Germany coming out of the central government until you really get organized up after World War II starts for America. And you do have in the BBC, I think it's news and entertainment that I give you for the BBC. Germany also gets small heroic tales because they were more organized. I don't know of anything as well organized, centrally done in France. Again, I just don't know of it. Very well may have been bigger than the BBC. I don't know of it. Soviet Union, I'm sure all of its radio was propagandized and centralized. I just believe that there was very, very low levels of radio receivers out there in the Soviet Union, where we've talked about the, what is it, Vox Camper or Comfer or whatever, the People's Radio in Germany that they were selling. So Japan, I don't know about. I know they had radios. I know that there were radio broadcasts going on, especially some of the recent reading I've been doing as talking about that. I just don't know in Japan how centrally organized it was. You know, like everybody reads, you know, the same, you know, on the same sheet of music. I've definitely been, in my reading, getting more and more about the newspapers. Up until the war, it's not a free press in Japan, but it's not a controlled press in Japan. It's more like more or less within Japanese cultural norms. And I'm saying that to the point is, I don't think if you had a newspaper, I'm talking like in 1936, if you had a newspaper in Japan and wanted to, you know, be the Communist Workers' Daily, I don't know if that would be allowed. I don't think it would be allowed. But you could have a newspaper that criticizes the government in Japan, you know, say, this minister sucks because of this. And you could go on and on about this, and, you know, within the constraints of Japanese culture and society at the time in the newspapers. Now, there, I think, was one case in which, you know, the newspaper criticizes the army, so the army bombs, and this is in Japan, bombs the newspaper building from, you know, an airplane, drops bombs on it. That's sort of one time and sort of an extreme reaction by the army to criticism in the newspaper. Now, as the war goes on, there are a few newspapers specifically shut down. By the military, and this is more by the military, the Kempetai, than by the government. We talked about how Japan is not a well-running, centrally organized state. So, you know, this is, I'm talking one sort of war with America. They do shut down some, they definitely arrest a fair amount of journalists, but normally let them go after a while. I'm sure they got a bit of a beating in that time, but like I've explained, school children might have gotten the same beating because, hey, it was Saturday night, and some upperclassmen thought, or wanted to beat a child who was a year or two younger, and so created or perceived an insult from the child, you know, the younger child, you know, a child a couple years younger than him, and so then beats like with a maybe not quite a baseball bat, but a good heavy, and not a flimsy little stick, but a good sort of stick beats them. So yeah, you know, I don't know the beatings and the police, and I'm not being joking about this, and I'm not being funny, and I'm not trying to make light of the police beatings. I'm just trying to explain to you my understanding, which may be wildly incorrect, but I'm getting this from Japanese authors talking about their experiences going through school, and I don't know whether. And this was common in the naval academy, though again, this one author, Hara, had not experienced it in his youth going through his education prior to the Naval Academy that he goes into. So this is a shock to him. But he also states that other students were already used to this kind of beatings from their previous school. So, so I'm trying to, so if you're used to this behavior of being beaten, that it's more important that you're being arrested by the police than that you're being beaten by the police, because you're already used to being beaten. Just trying to, But the main way they control the press, and this is mainly regarding to war-related things and trying to keep the people's spirits up and printing the correct news about the war, because this is what the Army is concerned with, is one, limiting the amount of paper and ink that a news paper gets. So, because early on they announced that, there's going to be rationing, and we'll have to make the decision of who gets these limited resources. So newspapers that print favorable news, one newspaper is still around, the Asahi Shimbun, a name I know well, hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, but the Asahi Shimbun prints extremely favorable propaganda for the military right wing before the war starts and continuing through the war. So they will get more paper and more newsprint to put out. Plus, they regulate who gets to be the reporters, that are getting information from the military, for a press conference, who gets to be in the room to write it up and report it. So this is how they're mostly controlling it, as opposed to, like I say, they do officially shut down some news, and it's also magazines. I'm talking print media here, but they do officially shut some down. But it's more a bunch of them going out of business because. Just how many days since you've gotten, a delivery of paper or ink, or how big is it? And so your circulation is down to only 10 or 20% of what it was before. How are you going to pay your reporters and your other staff? And so eventually they drive that out of business. One of the sort of journals that is sort of an intellectual journal, that largish, but sort of goes to a university professor types and other sort of technically oriented people, not just in universities, tries to explain to the government that with their audience you just can't do mindless propaganda. And so they're really wanting to be secretly in criticism of government policy in regarding to the war particularly. But, they're trying to walk this fine line. The Army doesn't buy it, and I think eventually, I don't know if blatantly shuts them down or just eventually cuts off their, cuts off their resources. But they try that logic with the Army, and it doesn't work. Okay, national unity, ruling party support would be very helpful. Consumer goods would be very helpful, but I think normally I would be going for consumer goods first, but I think just because we are trying to get all of this up better and more ruling party support, we're going to go with news to start with. And so as you can see from what I'm saying, all of this stuff does in a more, shall we say, informal, less programmed way. Now that we were talking radios, and again, I know that they definitely did radio broadcasts. I just don't know how widely they're put, but and radio broadcasts are very important, but it also holds true for the print, broadcast type, or print, printing all kinds of publications. One thing that I recently found out, that the manga and the anime are entirely post-war things. They did not exist in any real form prior to World War II, and they were the Japanese artists being influenced primarily during the occupation by American, often propaganda, that was done in sort of cartoon styles. And so they get the sort of some of the American cartoon styles, mix it with their traditional sort of Japanese aesthetic, and sort of come up with the sort of American cartoon, sort of get the cuteness from that cuteness factor. And so that is all a post-World War II phenomenon that doesn't exist without World War II and the Japanese being occupied. So the requirement is, of course, to lose the war. Okay, Spanish Civil War breaks out. I don't think we need to go into too much of that. We'll just pop over here and take a look. Yep, the Spanish Civil War, it's happening. We're not going to get involved. I don't know that there's any real way we can be, but we're not going to. Send help to Spain. Well, maybe I'm going to eat my words here. Let's see. I've not seen this before from outside of Germany stuff. Okay. You can now choose to send to any 500 supplies and 250 fuel or militia supplies to either side in the Spanish Civil War. If you send troops, you will regain the survivors after the conflict. How interesting. I don't know how to feel about this. And I'm thinking about this. I think Europe would go sort of nuts if Japan sent troops into the Spanish Civil War. And it may be more based on soft racism than hard racism. I know that, and I used a fair amount of her iconography of Josephine Baker for the French Hearts of Iron 4 series. And I know a bit about her story and whatnot that she does. And she really likes France, because France is a lot less racist of a place than America. And I would disagree with that. Now, she experiences a lot less racism in France and widespread acceptance in France. Now, she is of a mixed race background, not a pure African background. In America, that doesn't matter, and this is how, African Americans are just about anybody who, and this sort of comes out of the old South, who has any African blood, because Obama was the first black president. Well, he was half black, half white. His mother was white. His father was Kenyan. And so, which is sort of interesting in that growing up, neither of his parents had any ancestors that were American slaves. He, to the best of my knowledge, growing up, briefly, I believe, but he really doesn't know him. And I think it was just when he was very young, with his father, and maybe even less, because I'm not an expert on him. And then that relationship, father and mother, falls apart, and then he lives with, I guess, stepfather or whatever. I don't know the race right offhand. With his mother in Indonesia for like 10 years. And then the rest of his younger age growing up is in Hawaii, which is a very mixed race society. And I mean that as in World War II it even increases, in that it's not just a multiracial society, but in that there are lots of people that have mixed race parents. And so that you'll have grandparents that are white and Hawaiian, or white and Asian, or Asian and Hawaiian, that are fully enculturated in these different cultures, and it's your parents. And so you can go to one grandparent and have everybody, and being treated as part of the family within Hawaii, but everybody of this one sort of distinctive culture, and then you go to this other family with a different, very distinctive culture. And so you have this very sort of mixed race society in Hawaii, which is different experience than at least 1980 and before for most of America. Often you knew, and depending on where you are and what state you're in and whatnot, but often you knew people of other races and you got along fine with them, but they were not direct family members in that sort of a way. So Obama, and then a lot of that time he is raised by in Hawaii, his white grandparents. So Obama has a very different formative experience than his wife Michelle, who does come out of the African American community. And again, I don't know her background. But so Obama is not unique as in the only individual, but extremely rare in American circles. And he takes in most of his sort of American racial identity being black, either coming from his very communist grandparents, a communist black man who was, I forget the name, who was associated with his grandparents. His father, again, like I say, he had very little direct contact, I believe, with him. I'm not trying to put him down with any of this stuff. I'm just trying to go with the facts about it. Is a radical Kenyan nationalist. I don't know, but I'm going to presume something of the left. Again, I don't know what his father's politics are. They in fact could be extremely nationalistic and extremely right-wing. I don't know, but I don't think it really matters much. And then Obama going to relatively elite universities, primarily in Chicago, and interacting with them, generally with the leftists on campus. So he's only finally outside, and I don't know how many black children friends he has, almost probably zero in Indonesia, but probably a few in Hawaii. But again, it is one of the least racial states, to the point of a lot of American servicemen, particularly from the South, are sort of shocked and appalled at the lack of racial segregation when they get to Hawaii, and the idea that everybody is not just eating in the same mess halls or whatever, but blacks would be equally distributed among. Now, because of Woodrow Wilson, I don't know about the Navy specifically, but the Army, he resegregates the Army. Woodrow Wilson, the leftist hero, but he resegregates the Army. And so the Army is resegregated, and it still is segregated through World War II. The Pentagon has twice as many bathrooms as they felt they needed for the size and scope of the building and the amount of people that they were going to hold in it, because it was built in Arlington, Virginia, across the river. Not just there, but that sort of sentiment there is, it's within the old sort of square boundaries of Washington, D.C., but Washington, D.C., because of the Civil War, the Arlington side of the river is part of Virginia, not part of the District of Columbia, but it's built sort of within that, so it's very much part of D.C., but outside of D.C. It's the reason it has twice as many bathrooms is because they build equally located originally white and colored bathrooms. Now they're equally, and they're all, obviously today there's no signs in front of them, and they all look the same internally from all reports, and always had done so. But it was because the Army at the time, post World War II, because World War II we have the Department of War and its buildings are spread all out. After World War II they want to, and sort of the later parts of World War II, they want to coalesce them into one complex and develop the Pentagon that is still a segregated army. And so since it's a segregated army, the Air Force was still, because it was part of the Army, but I don't think it was ever segregated, the Air Force, once it's independent. The Navy, I don't know how segregated it was. There were no, to the best of my knowledge, again, and I'm fairly knowledgeable about the Navy, there were no black crewed ships. There were definitely, the idea in the Navy, blacks on board ships would only be doing certain jobs. I think it's the actor Cuba Gooding Jr., who famously represents one of the black cooks or something, who gets on a .50 caliber machine gun during the attack on Pearl Harbor, and he had watched how to operate it, but had never been coached on it because he wasn't a gunner and it wasn't part of his training. Gets on and shoots. And so we sort of see this segregation in that sense, and sort of job sense in the Navy. Now the Navy also has a long history of Filipino and Guam particularly mess boys, which are often men, but they're called mess boys, and they're waiters, sort of servant / waiter types, not. Well, for the captain, maybe an individual mess boy, but generally sort of for the officers or whatever on the ship. Now, they have this long-term tradition of that, but then again, they were Filipino and Guam residents. Forget what the Samoans or whatever you want to call people from Guam, but they're not U.S. citizens. This is, I'm sure their race plays a part in this, but if you are not a U.S. citizen, you're not going to be a full member of the United States Navy, and but they, because of various activities, U.S. Fleet Pacific activities, it's a good job for a lot of these people here, and so the Navy hires them, and they can hire them relatively cheaply and getting high quality workers for them. So there's this tradition. Now I remember being in an NJROTC, and one of the students assigned was there, and he was asked by because again, and I'm not sure, and this was a fair long time ago, but I'm not sure whether he could or couldn't if he wasn't a U.S. citizen, because obviously in junior naval ROTC you're not getting any top secret information, but you are being trained to be a reserve officer in the United States Navy eventually, but it's sort of the pre-training to it, and it's sort of mandated by Congress and this stuff. It's controlled by laws and regulations. But he was asked, I remember this, just where were you born? And a lot of them, and it turns out, and they were sort of, he was born on the U.S. Naval Base in the hospital there, in which there are a lot of Filipinos who work or had worked for the U.S. Navy, as well as for the Air Force base there that also had a hospital, and their dependents got, so it could be the guy who's working there, but the wife who is going to have a baby could be rushed to the American hospital, and since they were born on American territory at the time, because those two bases, unlike some other bases, were American territory or considered so as part of the treaty agreement. So, yeah, that qualifies as a U.S. citizen, at least according to the Navy. So the Navy would qualify him as a U.S. citizen for purposes of serving. Now, this was in the 1980s, and so when, of course, the Filipinos were completely independent as a nation, but we still, at least at that time, we no longer have any bases in the Philippines. But we used to have a major naval and major air base in the Philippines. So that's sort of the reason for that segregation. And then there are massive numbers of Filipinos still in the U.S. Navy to this day because of these associations. And you still need to go through all of the regulations, but there's a lot that are get their loophole citizenship because they had been born, and then their children get citizenship because their parents are citizens of the U.S., so that they join the U.S. Navy. And there's a lot of that still going on. I don't know. I say a lot of it. It's a very small minority compared to the overall U.S. Navy, but there's still this special relationship going with the Philippines that isn't going with, I don't know, the Australians, or, pick your pick your country. Now, of course, Guam, now all the citizens of Guam are citizens of the United States. They still mostly go into the Navy because they're an island people. The Navy is the people who interacts with them the most. So, yeah. The U.S. is racist. And I was back to Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker is the few rare anglicized, some may be completely genetically African, but are anglicized Americans that are coming into mostly Paris and are accepted and don't have to use the back, because even in a lot of places outside of the South back in those days, black entertainers or black staff, waiters, maids for a hotel, whatever, would have to use the rear entrances and exits to the hotel, even if they're headlining on the, and this was the way it was in Vegas for a long time, headlining on, the entertainment bill. They would still not be allowed to be seen in the sort of public common areas of the hotel or other entertainment thing, just because they were black. And this wasn't a law like it may have been in the segregated South. This was just hotel policies in America. So Josephine Baker faces all this. What Josephine Baker doesn't see and doesn't face is what the French reaction would be to their French colonials, the Africans, the Vietnamese, and these other peoples that aren't Francophiled. Sure, if they had been raised in the right schools, have the right elite parents, and speak French fluently and behave in a French manner, they will again be the sort of rare individual moving around Paris and not facing a lot of racism, if you will, or at least not a lot of overt racism. But if you were to, what do these same French citizens think about these Africans who are living, in the French Congo? There was the Belgian Congo and the French Congo, or in Cameroon or wherever else. They would probably have as racist or greater racist attitudes about them. This is I'm talking in the 1930s, as you would in America. So it's, yes, Josephine Baker experiences her experience, and she experienced, because who she was, less racism in particularly France. I don't think French were generally less racist. It's just the situation. Now, if you were to send Japanese soldiers, now they sent Chinese soldiers to fight in World War I in Europe. To the best of my knowledge, not a single one of them ever fought, ever got anywhere near the front lines. They were used as laborers. I don't know how the Chinese troops themselves thought about this. If they thought that, hey, we were coming to fight and we're proud warriors and all you're having us doing is moving cargo, or whether they thought, hey, this is a better job than I would be having back in China, because they weren't, at least by Chinese standards, and I don't think particularly badly by European standards for, military workers. They were treated, any harsher. They may have been living in tents under canvas, but so were lots of French, American, British soldiers living in tents under canvas during World War I, and I don't think they were fed any worse food. I'm not saying it was good food, but any worse food than the, standard soldiers in World War I. They were just, and there were thousands of them. I don't know that many thousands, but there were thousands of them that were sent, and they ended up just being laborers. I just don't know whether, China, hey, we're in the war, we want to send some troops, because part of the reason they got in the war is to, clear out the German colonial holdings in China. Now that that's done, we want to support you in the war, and I don't know, what do you want? Oh, you want some laborers, so we'll send you some military laborers. Or, hey, we want to send you our best regiments, and then they get, whether they're good or not, I don't know, but get stuck. Because China is, like I've said in the past, China is able to create, generally with European help, a few really good units, but most of their units suck. So I don't know who was sent. And the French themselves in World War I bring, I'm particularly right now thinking about Vietnamese and Congolese, but also maybe some other groups of colonial troops, and some of those do fight in the trenches in World War I. But those are, of course, under the control of France and not under control of a non-European power. And like I said, the Chinese are just sent in as laborers. I think you would have had a very negative reaction to this. Because of that, we're just going to send supplies to the nationalists. We're not going to rock the boat. And let's save this. I hope this will save, because I've noticed my saves don't work if I just sort of let it sit for a long time and then it goes to sleep. But it did work that time. So on that note, hope it was interesting. I know we didn't get that far in it yet, not even a month more. But thank you for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, and of course, please post questions, comments, corrections if I'm getting stuff wrong, which I'm sure I'm getting something wrong. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.